Hello, everybody. Welcome to the More Data Now What Tech Chat Roundtable discussion. I'm Liz Olson, Director of Marketing at Dicom Systems, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. I'll let Dmitry and Boris introduce themselves in just a minute, but first I want to go through a couple of housekeeping items, everyone's favorite. We want this session to be as interactive as possible, so please ask questions throughout the discussion. If you're feeling shy today and you'd prefer to send me a question via the chat feature in Zoom, you can do that as well, and I will ask it for you. Secondly, you are entering a non-CME session. So this session is the non-CME portion of the SIIM21 program, and it's not eligible for physician CME. And lastly, today we're going to be discussing all things data and how more data inherently brings more questions. How will the shared data be collected? Are there incentives for standardizing the data? Whose data is more meaningful? I'll ground you on the objectives for this discussion. First, discuss driving AI-ready data adoption. Second, recognize and manage data bias. Third, examine incentives for standardizing AI-ready data. And lastly, identify current challenges associated with all things data, for example, sharing and collecting. And with that, I'll let Dmitry and Boris introduce themselves. Dmitry, take it away.
Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Dmitriy Tochilnk. I'm CEO and founder of Dicom System. This topic is extremely relevant to us, given the fact that we are constantly doing data normalization and de-identification using our flagship product, Unifier, and running AI algorithm using our AI Conductor product. Boris Zavalkovskiy has been our loyal customer while working for different companies. I'll let Boris to introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Boris Zavalkovskiy, and I started the journey of digital imaging very long time ago and was part of the inception of the PACS as what we know today, working for L'Oreal and Lockheed. And as Dmitry pointed out, I've been through many organizations in my career. I'm currently with the Envision Health as the Director of IT Architecture.
Great. Thank you for those introductions. So I'll kick it off with the first question here. So Boris, talk to me about the current challenges associated with all things data is what we're saying. So sharing, collecting, et cetera.
Right, so we're talking specifically data of AI and how challenging it is to understand what it is really mean. Overall data is a challenge across large organizations and organizations that merge or buy somebody. Standard data is challenging itself, but we will not talk about that today. What we talk about today is specifically the data and what are the challenges with the AI in regards to the data. So as you guys know, AI use the terms of sensitivity and specificity, which is not a new term in medicine. They were using this for diagnosis just by the people as well. So when AI talk about those numbers, it's depending what vendor you're really going to, right? So if the vendor A telling you, hey, my sensitivity is 97% and my specificity is 98%, which is, for people who don't know, it means that the rate of false negative is about 3% and the rate of false positive is about 8%, which is good numbers for AI to have. But the real question is when they give you these numbers, they gather those numbers based on their test data set. So they customize the algorithm and they train the algorithm based on their existing data set that they use. If you go to company B and ask them, and they're going to give you the same numbers, 97 and 92, it does not mean that this algorithm is going to perform in your environment exactly the same. So I constantly have ability to take a look and see what are the data set, how they train the algorithm, how vast it is across the geographic, how diverse the data is in regards to the population, and things like that. So those are all challenges that we currently experience with the data, and when we're looking how do we train AI? And if we train on our data and then we move into the hospital A or B or C, does algorithm perform the same, or do you still need to have additional training and additional data to ensure the fact that the algorithm perform consistently well? So this is kind of to open up from perspective of the challenges that I see in perspective of the data. And the last thing that I do want to mention is the duplication of the data, right? If you look across the continuum, I suspect some data across all these different vendors is somewhat overlap. But even though the data maybe overlaps, how they analyze the data and how they look at the data normalization is completely different. So I believe that needs to be addressed as well. So with that, I'm going to pass to Dmitry to see if he would like to add anything to that, or as we pointed out before in the beginning, if anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts, this is an open table discussion. So just raise your hand like this and turn your mic on and start talking to us.
Yeah, I think the naturally kind of the next, not topic, the extension of this topic, it's the bias data. So deep learning has achieved major breakthrough during the past decade in almost every field. So there are plenty of publicly available algorithms, each designed to address a different task of computer vision in general. However, most of those algorithms cannot be directly applied to images in medical domain, just as they stand. There are serious steps that have to happen before medical images and reports can be used for AI imaging. Data source and potential bias may affect the accuracy of AI algorithms. So due to the availability of medical images that are owned by healthcare providers, AI developer has often had to compromise and resort of using limited data set to train their algorithm. A few hundred images in some cases, which is extremely low number. The main reason for bias usually are too few images, too little diversity in the data set, and too few clinicians helping to train an algorithm, and simply I would say human error. So every radiologist worry about missing a diagnosis or giving false positive reading. So let's say the retrospective error, according to the study rate among radiologic examination, is approximately 30%, with real-time error in daily radiology practice average 3 to 5%. So currently, medical image data is stored in isolated, decentralized silos. This is what you were talking about. The different organizations treat them differently. Limited the development in generalizable, unbiased AI algorithm, which could be theoretically solved by having centralized data storage system. So some big cloud providers are trying to make this type of data lake available, but creating an API to easily access imaging data in the cloud. We haven't seen many potential customers adopting this technology yet due to strict HIPAA regulation and also complexity of those API for end users. So it is possible to filter bias data, and this is technologically solvable issue. Even if there is some inconsistent data with enough data volume, you can simply identify and separate the bad apple showing on top of the scale. The good analogy would be is when you prepare chicken soup, skimming the foam will improve the clarity of the stock and also prevent contamination. So this is the same approach for the algorithm to fix the bias data with enough data set. The same will happen with bias and inconsistent data, I would say. It requires getting a lot of data to be able to easily filter bias data. When data is being made, so another point is when data is being made available to AI developers, appropriate data management, it is very essential. So make sure data normalization applies. If it doesn't happen in the right time and has to be done later, it's usually time-consuming and expensive process. It's critical to normalize the data from the different modality and other sources as the data coming, as the data being generated and coming through. So nowadays, clinical decision often relies on imaging data in radiology and also pathology, dermatology, ophthalmology, wound care, and other. And this imaging data needs to be normalized for easier processing, also for AI output. To be able to perform this at later stage will require significant effort. You'll have to pull the right data set, which can be challenging due to different mapping. So the point is, it's much easier to complete the normalization process as data is being received. So really hope to see more and more of those data normalization and standardization project in the coming years.
Yeah, so talking about the data normalization, kind of synonymous to standardization, because everybody have their own norms, right? So in healthcare, they define normal versus abnormal very, very clearly based on the specific tests and the specific criteria. And if you talk about a multitude of vendors that are present, they will tell you, we normalize the data. But vendor A normalized the data significantly different from vendor B. You see some of the larger vendors even try to create some of the data lakes online, and they normalize the data as well. But normalization from cloud to cloud to cloud are significantly different, as well as the variety of the images is very, very different. So this is kind of waves into our point number 2 about the standardization and adoption, which are two different things. One thing is coming up with the standard, and another thing is actually adopting the standard.
And use that standard and pushing.
So before we're going to dive into the standard, and I'm kind of going to give you to the history of one of the standards that was created and how. Does anybody have any questions or comments or recommendations or share experience?
Yeah.
So I do have a question. I was wondering.
Cheryl, you break it up. We can't really hear you well.
And I think Amina had a question.
Cheryl.
So, all right. So I was wondering if you could speak to some of the challenges that have been experienced specifically around photographic data in terms of normalization or even the metadata about how the photographs are acquired.
So
Dmitry, you want to do it, or do you want me to take that one?
So you're talking about the light,
like wound care,
and ophthalmology, and yeah. So there is a
visible light.
Yeah, there is a certain format how that, and we've done few of those projects for one for ophthalmology and for dental, some of them for dental as well, with digitizing, but there is some standard, we know for a fact the Dicom standard exists for those type of imaging, and metadata can be normalized, but are you talking about how those data is being acquired? That's the big question, because if you're doing the post normalization, again, some information will be missing versus because you're not getting that information from the modality itself to acquisition device. So because some data can be generated, some cannot. So that's the only challenge in that effort for vision, the light imaging. So Boris, do you want to add to this?
No, I think you did very well. Just a small addition. The visible light, some imaging, as Dmitry pointed out, already have a Dicom standards like ophthalmology, right? They do some visible light imaging, and they have a very rich metadata that can be exploited in regards of normalization and put correct attributes. But if you're referring to something like a wound care where you have a regular camera and you just take JPEG images, and then you store them in your EMR system or EHR systems, those images outside of EMR or EHR have no metadata, and therefore very hard to analyze by the computer. They can potentially tell you, where the disease is. They potentially even tell you what they think from perspective what kind of disease it is, but it's completely separate from the patient record. So there is more and more standards getting generated for these type of things, and the device need to be trained to collect and attach all the metadata related to this image to the header of the image, so it could be analyzed and not be separate from the EMR. But there are a number of visual light AI that are already in the market, and some have quite successful deployment in regards to sensitivity and specificity for some diseases, which is also true for AI for the radiological images. We're not yet addressing 100% of breadth of the radiology. They're concentrating on specific algorithm in a specific body parts and specific diseases. So it's not yet that you get into the AI and it will tell you everything that is wrong. Do the full body CT, run the algorithm, and they just tell you everything that is there. No, we are still very specific and very intentional in regards how we're using AI today.
I think we have a couple of.
I hope that answered the question.
Cheryl? I think I lost. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. And you're welcome to contact us after this meeting. So you have our information. You can email or with any questions, by the way.
Yep.
No, can I just ask you one additional question, and that is how important are you finding issues with scale in terms of measurement and also color calibration when you're thinking about photographs?
This is, I don't have.
Let's give it a shot.
Yeah, we need to find out more details. It depends what they're going to be used it for. So for some, the calibration, it is important. So then and it depends what those results are it's going to be used for what, again, what part of the diagnosis you'll be performed, but I could just take a wild guess because I need to have more information about this question. So
thank you. It
Cheryl,
sounds like it hasn't been a huge issue yet. Maybe.
Cheryl, it is definitely important, and this is probably just as important as calibration of the monitors. With the penetration of LCD and LEDs monitors, it's kind of gone away. But if you remember in the time of early days with the CRTs, calibration of the grayscale monitors were paramountly important. Otherwise, physician would miss the pathology. So it's no different for AI. AI is a substitute in analytics. So if you don't have a correct color representation, it would also make the mistake. But as you know, the Dicom presentation state was clearly defined. So I suspect with the penetration of the standards for the visible light imaging, those definitions would also be defined, and therefore AI would be much more effective in those situations. Does that address your question, Sure? Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, perfect. I think
Mina, you had a question?
Yeah.
Yes. So I wanted to circle back to the mention of, bias in AI. And specifically, as we know, there's just not enough data available to train the different algorithms. I'm just wondering what the efforts are in order to, help with that. I know there's a lot of talk about it. I'm not really sure of the efforts. Like, are we working towards having more publicly available data sets? Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I wish we would have answer to this. I know, yeah, I mean, different company working on that. Again, we are vendor. The data doesn't belong to us, so we can. I mean,
Right.
there is a lot of data going through our devices. No questions about this, but this is that's interesting question. What we see definitely see some effort for some of the cloud providers to create a data lake and to make this. I know the ACR has some of those projects, but again, those I haven't seen much personally.
Right. And I know there's a lot of collaboration between, different institutions with, for example, like the ACR, but just also just the publicly available data for, vendors to kind of use and grab to help, train. I'm pretty fortunate. I work at a very large, well-resourced institution. So we can, with an IRB, of course, get approval to, the proper approval to, help train the data on our site, right? But this may not be applicable or likely not to another large site next door. So I think it's also, just circling back to the publicly available data, there's also ethics that can tie into that. And it becomes this line of like, we need to be able to make this better, but how do we do it? And it just seems to be happening, very slowly.
So I would say sharing that data and make it publicly available, that's the last step before even go to that stage. The data has to be ready, AI ready. So basically, it's not every data would work. So that's the whole point. So the sharing piece, it's a last kind of hop to all this workflow. But I think before that, even in your big institution, the data has to be prepared and make sure that it can be applicable to different algorithms, standardized and reports, the labeling, and everything has to be in order before that takes place. And then the de-identification is kind of a last piece that data has to be re-identified. And again, based on the template, which is approved by those organizations, because again, the identification, it's
right.
There is some standard, obviously, for that, but again, it's there's different approach for the identification, for metadata, for the pixel, and etc. So,
thank you.
Right. So just to add to that.
Oh, sorry. I think we have another question from Kevin, but go ahead, Boris, if you want to add to it.
Yeah, I just want to add to it, and what couldn't agree more with Dmitry. So how to de-identify the data is very clearly defined from HIPAA perspective, right? Nothing should be leading back to the patient, which is great, right? But in reality, what does it really mean in regards of all the Dicom tags? Is the referring provider is there? Is the institution is there? So there is a lot of other things that are not tied to patient that are potentially proprietary in nature and should not be shared. So filing the data, Cheryl mentioned, what about the quality of the images? Is that needs to take into consideration? So forget about the identification, but if you get a very poor CT of the head, should that pass the muster and get into the overall data set, or we should weed those out automatically and say quality of the images is insufficient? What about the technique of acquisition, right? So if the images were not acquired with the approved standard acquisition technique, should those be part of this data set as well? As you and many others work in a variety of different institutions, people creating new algorithms and new acquisition techniques and new processing. So how do we manage all this acquisition of the images and standardization of that? I can tell you, working in many institutions thus far, especially in the large institutions, and you tell me if you solve this problem in your institution, we have all kinds of different standards for a variety of different CT of the chest. So depending what hospital or clinics you go, they go all over the place, even though they're using CPT code. One can have as little as 400 images, and some goes to over 2,000 images from the acquisition perspective. So what is the standard? So there is a lot of clinical analysis that need to go and say, what is the sufficient and what is insufficient to even go into the pool? So just want to add to this, some of the clinical perspective to make sure that it's not just the data fields and it's not just patient related, but it's also image related as well as visible light image as well. Do we look at some photographs and say those should not be part of the data set and exclude them right off the bat? Liz, you said somebody have some question?
Yeah, Kevin has a question.
I think Boris may have just answered most of it for me. Earlier in the conversation, the words standardization and normalization were coming up an awful lot, and I was feeling a little bit lost. They were feeling a little bit abstract because there's something they continuum from, let's make sure everything's in Dicom so that we can run everything through the same, at least we're starting from a comparable format, down to, what Cheryl was talking about, consistent lighting and all the sort of really low-level data manipulation. I'm wondering where along that spectrum we're talking right now, or are we talking pretty much the whole range?
From my perspective, I think it is the whole range. I don't think that you can address one and completely ignore the other. Well, I guess you can, but the outcomes are going to be substandard as a result of that. So I think it's a combination of the image acquisition, data standardization, normalization of the procedural things, as well as the textual data, not just the imaging data. So the more you have standardized on what is the inputs are, then I think that quality of the data will grow significantly. The AI would be trained and normalized much better, and the outcomes of the AI will be progressively better than if you just concentrate on one or another. Now, we need to start somewhere. So I'm not necessarily saying that, hey, let's do this all together at the same time. We can break this up and say where we can get the best thing for the buck and start standardizing those areas, understanding that some of the areas potentially are so challenging that it would not come to fruition in a short period of time, and concentrate on the things that in the industry they say low-hanging fruit, and start with those, because standardizing the clinical aspect, I think, is going to be very challenging.
And I'd like to add to this that I agree, Kevin, those standards exist, like Dicom standard build for a while, but there is a lot of different optional field and optional information, and you can receive data right now which totally acceptable by device with no study description, no body parts, not the standardized information. Standardized meaning there is different type of vocabulary being used and etc. So for the AI weighted data, you have to define that requirement of certain field. They have to be there, make them not optional. They have to be required for future modification. And so it has to be specific to for the AI weighted data, not just the Dicom. So it can be, again, can be normalized in the later stage, but it's way harder because then you might even need to query some of the EMR data in order to update that standard Dicom, even if we're talking about the Dicom files. So
I think that's a segue.
Kevin, does that answer the question?
I think so. I'm still feeling a little bit adrift, but I think that may just be part of the nature of the problem here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's
Well,
part of the segue
let's
here is that there's no, let's talk about that. So there's actually no standard driving AI for the data to be AI ready. So I think that's part of our conversation and discussion is similar to, I remember the days of EMR. I'm sure like everyone did when we went from paper to EMRs, and you know, people freaked out and they started hoarding their papers. And so you know, that's part of our conversation here is so, you know, how do we drive making sure that the data is AI ready and drive that adoption? And then why is it important to start standardizing it now? So I'll let Boris and Dmitry tackle that, but that might help because we are sort of talking about something that doesn't exist. There are no standards for this. So yeah, I'll kick it over to you guys.
So Kevin, you are not alone. And if anybody feels firm and they know exactly what needs to be done, please chime in because that's going to be a breakthrough. But from the perspective of the creation of the standards, which doesn't exist, that takes significant amount of time. So I want to use the example. So the first CT was commercially available somewhere in 1972, right? So the successful prototype of the brain scan was done in 1972, and by the year of 1973, in the United States, we have over 3 million CT scans, right? We're talking 1973. So the first Dicom standard come out in 1985. So you can imagine how difficult it was, and people feel exactly how you're feeling right now on how they can integrate their devices. And ultimately, ACR NEMA got together, you know, and say, hey, we need to come up with a standard. So coming up with the standard in 1985, which was ACR NEMA 300 was released, right? It doesn't mean that adoption is there, right? So it took additional 10 plus years to actually get to the point where the vendors and the hospitals start to rely, and everybody was saying, I would like to see your Dicom compliance statement. Before that, they were going to vendors and saying, hey, is this CT scanner is going to work with my PACS? And they were saying, absolutely. It's a Dicom. And guess what? In 1995, Dicom was not, even though the standard was defined, not everybody was compliant. So if you're going to look at the progression of the Dicom, in 1993, the third version was released to address the local network. Before that, you can actually only do point-to-point communication. So if you see 1973, we had CT scanners, and then 1993, we finally said, oh, we need to address the local area network. In 1995, ultrasound, X-ray, angiography, and nuclear medicine protocol was only defined in 1995. In 1997, radiation therapy objects was added. In about 2001, mammography CAD was added. So you can see where I'm going with this. In 2004, the web access for the Dicom objects, WADO, was defined. Dentistry in 2004, and media exchange was added in 2004. So the people exchange images on CDs way before 2004, but the standard was defined in 2004. And only in 2019, Dicom Web Documentation Reorganization Part 18 to provide comprehensive view of the Dicom web services was finally defined. We're talking about just a few years back. So as you can see, definition of the standard, and I'm going to turn over to Dmitry, who works a lot with WADO and things, and he can tell you WADO, even though it was defined in 2004, the adoption of WADO is, especially in this country, is virtually non-existent.
Yeah, we had the Dicom web application and API in our product for the last 6 years, but there is organic market push of new Dicom standard like Dicom Web and EMR HL7 standard FHIR for the last 5 years. I would say 5-6 years. We see more and more new integration with Dicom Web and FHIR coming up. It's a really good sign. So like 6 years ago, we didn't even know how it's going to play out. But now we see more and more coming up. Also, a new application come on the market using new technology, because there is no point to develop new application of using 30 years old technology. So there isn't 20. There is an example how the new technology, the new technology is being adopted naturally. So there is no government push like meaningful use adoption for AMR, where hospital and medical offices were forced to migrate. So this is the same analogy, I would say, for AI adoption. It does take time though, so we see more and more, but it still it's not widely used. So besides the problem with the, let's say, biased data, lack of normalization, and the availability of annotated data is the key hurdle actually to for implication of artificial intelligence, because this is what it's absolutely required for most of the algorithm. Structure report standard has been available for a while, but it hasn't been adopted everywhere. So you still have radiologists using different type of system to create the reports, and the structure report is not being generated. And as well as labeled data is essential for most AI algorithms. So if diagnostician will be incentivized somehow to label these studies as they are going through the normal review and report findings, it will probably close this gap. But the data will be easily accessible in the future for most AI algorithms. So, but right now, most of the AI algorithms, it's being, so the data is being prepared separately after the fact. So we briefly talk about DAD profile and identification, which is, I mean, it is defined. And that part can be applied on the fly in a later stage, as long as DAD, as long as the template is being defined, so you don't need to store data in multiple copy of the data. So again, the big question, I think the natural market push for such development will take years. So the big question is, it will be incentivized to accelerate this process, or just market will dictate this? And I guess Boris' example with PACS, it's really adoption. It's probably the good example, really good example to this. So
right, it was really market driven, and I believe this is going to have to take the same effect. And the reason that the difference that Liz mentioned with the EMR, and there were incentive and a punishment from the financial perspective for institution to do that, because it has to do with the outcomes for the patient care. So what we're talking about here is really a standard that will help algorithm to define. So I think with the later evolution, some incentives potentially going to be feasible, because as we have increased population and decrease of the professionals and evolution of the AI, it is a potential further down the road that they will farm some of the cases that only AI will look at, and the human will not. So if the case is negative and it can be specificity to 99.9%, that it's a negative thing, that potentially a human radiologist or specialist who need to diagnose this disease would not be in the picture altogether. And for that to happen, you have to have a standard from the beginning of the description. So you can't anymore order exam saying fall from the ladder. You know, the order CT will get order and says patient fall from the ladder. Okay, so where's the pain? What should I image? You know, the definitions need to be defined from the beginning. How do you order the exam, all the way through all of the things that we talked about today in regards to how the technology is preparing the images, what are the standards for the acquisitions, what are the professionals from the dictation of the reports, and how they label the exam, and how the system filed it, and how is it accessible. So all those evolutionary things will need to happen for AI to be really effective and really start to help us to concentrate on the really complicated pathology cases that really required a human brain to really analyze and give it the thing. And the things that we know are okay, and it's just a screening, those gonna go through AI, but we are a long way away from that for all those reasons that we just described from perspective of standard of acquisition, storage, communication, and presentation state to the AI.
Hello, everyone.
We have about from...
Hey, Luke.
Yeah, this is
Luke.
Luke Beto. I have a question for you. What do you guys think needs to happen to help unlock all of the valuable data that exists here in the U.S.? You know, Vega provides some data services, and probably number one challenge we face is not even so much a technical one; it's more of a compliance issue.
Yes.
Risk. We may present an organization with an opportunity to do a data project with us, and we'll get some kind of response having to do with risk and reward. You know, how can we ensure that we're not going to make any mistakes and some PHI might get exposed? What would the liabilities be for the imaging facility if something like that happened, and so forth? So what do you think needs to happen to get organizations more comfortable with participating in data projects to help drive innovation in AI and so forth?
So from my perspective, again, I think the standard needs to be developed, right? So everything that you described is absolutely correct, right? So a lot of people don't participate because there is no precedence, and mistakes will be made, and PHI get exposed today, every day, and there is a process how to deal with that as well. So the clear standards will tell you, hey, here's what you need to provide if you want to contribute to the data lake, government, organizational, no matter what it is. You can say, hey, here's a set of standards. This is what need to be there, and this is what should not be there. And when you clearly define that, I think that will open up a lot of organizations to not ponder, like Kevin said, well, I'm kind of woozy on what is where. Well, we all are, and therefore the hesitance of organizations from the compliance and legal perspective, because it's not clearly defined. People saying, well, we don't really know what is okay and what is not okay. So right now, you need to have a patient consent, right, if you want to use the data. So until that is changed, you need to go to all your participants. So I believe Amina mentioned, hey, we can have an IBR and we can sign up the patients, but this is extremely manual labor, right? You need to get consent from so many patients and how you get it. So if you define the clear standards and say, hey, all healthcare provider, if you want to contribute to the data lake, are the set of standards. This is what you needed to do to comply. What needs to happen on the image side, what needs to happen on the order side, what needs to happen on the report side, what data should be there, what data should not be there. And I believe when you clearly define that, and these standards going to start to be adopted, and we talk about standard generation versus standard adoption, that could be a very significant time lapse. But if we define the standard and we start to go to the market and say, this is how we can contribute for the better of humanity, then I think over time it will be adopted. But without the standard, you will have a lot of hesitation from a lot of different people and organizations. So they do things internally, but they're not open to open this up anywhere to the external organization for those legal reasons and the compliance reasons that you mentioned. And
besides this standard, I think to be able to incentivize organizations to use the new technology, giving you example like PG&E and solar. So if it would be PG&E coal, there wouldn't be any solar because that's obvious against their business model, but they have to have certain percentage, only certain percentage of the solar energy, solar generated green energy. So if it would be, besides the standard, the adoption of the standard, if it would be some incentive, I'm not saying it has to be the penalties also, but incentive to use the AI in certain field, and the percentage of AI in certain field, that would probably help as well, to push those standards, to accelerate the process, I would say. But again, it's just an opinion.
Right. So we really hope that this is help you guys understand the challenges. And Liz, if you will share our information with the panel, we'll be happy to continue this conversation offline, and hopefully together we can come up with some working group, maybe SIIM will host it, and we can continue this conversation and maybe come up with something that will help us all move forward from here.
Yes, please connect with us. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
We,
Have a great day.
Thank you, Nikki.
bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.